tools to succeed.
They will strive.
We will strive.
They will thrive.
We will thrive.
They will rise.
Yes, we will. Elevating futures. When we're elevating futures. Futures, yeah.
My guest today is Tom Murray, the Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools in Washington, D.C. Tom has extensive experience as a teacher, principal, and district-level leader. He has testified before Congress and collaborated with various educational bodies to promote student-centered learning. A recognized thought leader in education, he has authored best-selling books and has been honored with multiple awards, including Top 100 Influencers in Education. Tom, welcome to our podcast.
Tracee, what an honor it is to be with you. Thanks so much for having me, and excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, so am I. So I guess it's best to just start at the beginning. Tell me about your journey into the field of education and what inspired you to pursue a career in this domain.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much. Love the podcast. Such an honor to be on. Thank you for having me. You know, as I hit rewind on my career, so much of what I really preach today and work on today, I think comes through my own lens, my own upbringing, and realizing, you know, we all look at things differently. We all have different experiences. We all have different lenses. For me, growing up, I always wanted to work with kids. And I thought when I was going to college, I wanted to do it as a pediatrician. Loved working with kids. I just loved being around kids. I volunteered at some programs nearby, and just that's what I had my heart set on. And I got to college and I did well pre-med that first year, and something hit me that, you know, I don't want to just work with kids when they're not feeling well. I want to really get to know them, and not knocking doctors by any means, but I had a heart shift there and realizing, you know what I want to teach. I want to really get to know our kids. And so transitioned to do that from my sophomore year on, went into student teaching, and I was like, this is for me. But I will tell you, I can still remember, like many of our listeners, I bet, closing that door that first time in my own classroom. For me, I was 21 years old, fresh out of college, teaching fourth grade, closing that door, looking around, being like, well, ready or not, I guess we're going. Here goes. Let's go. I'm scared out of my mind, right? Here's what I'm really blessed to have had: so many mentors and people that just have loved on me, have supported me along the way. My last book, Personal and Authentic, I talk about a mentor that just completely changed the trajectory of my life in a lot of different ways, helping me refocus from what I taught to who I taught. So I taught fourth grade, loved elementary, loved that age group, and had the opportunity. I also had a passion for technology and had the opportunity to go teach sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. I did that for a while. And then I had another mentor, a principal, walk into my room one day and say, you know, Tom, I've only got a couple of these years left. I know you've got 2 master's degrees, but go finish your next one for administration. Would love to see you running this building someday. What I didn't know is my assistant principal at that point would be leaving about a year and a half later, finished that degree, ended up walking into that job with opportunity, did that, went back to the elementary level as a principal, then went to district office because another mentor, a superintendent, said, I've got an opportunity for you, right? When those things come our way. And so obviously I couldn't keep a job. So now I work out of Washington, D.C., right? Totally fitting. So I've had the opportunity to be a teacher and a principal at both levels, both secondary and at elementary. And now I get to work helping to lead Future Ready Schools nationally, an equity-focused nonprofit out of Washington, D.C., part of All for Ed. And All for Ed's the home organization. Future Ready Schools, kind of the practice side of that. Get to work with school and district leaders all across the country. And, you know, what keeps me excited right now in the work and just from the career end is no matter where I go, there's great people working really, really hard for kids. And there's some significant issues that need to be tackled nationally. And there's great people doing the work. And so I'm excited to be on another great person's podcast, and that would be you. So thanks for having me. That's a little bit about my trajectory over my, I guess, 25, 26 year career now, but excited to be here.
You know, I share some of the common experiences that you talked about. I went into psychology, actually, when I was an undergrad. And then I got a little intrigued with developmental psych and with children. And I did a research study on child care centers and on gendered toy choices. So I'm just in there watching to see what toys the girls choose and which toys the boys choose. Mind you, this was back in 2001. And I stumbled into my mother's Head Start classroom. and some other daycares as well, one being the University of Michigan's Child Care Center. And I realized that I was more intrigued with children than maybe I thought. I'd done some mentoring, done a lot in that regard, but the education piece started to pique my interest. Not enough to go to school for it right away, but enough to become involved. And I found out very quick that studying cognitions and motivation is not enough to be qualified to work in a classroom. So I ended up in a crash course on classroom management, working in childcare, working under my mother and our nonprofit. And then I said at some point, I can't train everyone in this manner by just following and being an apprentice, right? So that's when I went back to school to try to deconstruct what was working pedagogically and why. And so it was in my PhD program that I studied social work with a minor in education and became more involved. But I didn't really start to see myself as an educator until about 5 years ago. I mean, it's something that, when you love children, you just intrinsically give them what they need. But the steps to being a teacher, the steps to being able to explain things so people understand, the ability to get people excited about education is a gift. And I said, you know what? After here it is, I'm 40 years old, and I finally figured out why I'm here. So education has that way of, hooking people. And, when we think that it's time for us to get out of a classroom, we find ourselves in other roles. So I totally respect your journey.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Tracee, thanks for sharing part of your story there as well. And as you were talking, it really made me think about how I've learned so much over my journey. I'm not just in a different role 25 years later. I'm a different human being 25 years later. I've learned so much, and part of what you were just sharing, and how you didn't see yourself as an educator until a number of years ago. For me, I look back into early on into what I was just sharing in those first few classrooms, and I had such blinders on. I thought every kid walking into my classroom had a similar upbringing from me or had similar resources at home. And I knew that they didn't, but I don't know if I really knew that they didn't, right? And 25 years later, when I look back on my career, there's so many things that I wish I did differently. Even just standing there in those first couple of years and those opening, here we are, towards the beginning of the school year, people, all right, tonight, make sure you go home and get these folders, and you need to be able to do this, and you need to go purchase this, and you need to get this. Because my mom always took me to CVS on the first night of school, and I never even thought in those moments of how many students were sitting there that was going to be, well, if we're going to go purchase that, we're not going to be able to eat dinner tonight, right? And so I share vulnerably part of the journey over the past 25 years. I've become a different person in the way that I see the world, trying to remove some of my own blinders in life of things of just my own lens each day, and things that I'm just much more attuned to today that maybe weren't really on my radar, but needed to be 25 years ago.
Well, I think that probably has been integral in you moving into systems work, having that understanding and that sensitivity to all of the stakeholders that participate in our education system. And so, being the director of innovation for Future Ready Schools, tell me about the key priorities and initiatives you focused on to support schools and districts, given that empathy that you now you can pull right off your fingertips, where in early years it's kind of, we were aware, but not really aware of the magnitude. So how's that informed your work with Future Ready Schools, and how has it shaped your priorities and initiatives?
Absolutely. So first, again, if people want to check out futureready.org, part of a nonprofit called All for Ed, again, an equity-focused organization. And so leaning from, I shared just a few moments ago, moving from what I taught to who I taught shows some of the difference in how I would have answered this question 20 years ago. Would have dove into the math skills and the reading skills and the writing skills. And listen, that's all really important stuff. It certainly is. But the who matters to me first. And so when I look at from a Future Ready School lens, and we could talk about this for hours, so I'll break it down into just a few minutes here, really helping school districts to lead innovative change and transformation in a sustainable way. Today, district and school leaders have just so many pressures from the outside, political pressures, budget pressures, just pressures to meet certain marks, and from an accountability end to get to certain spots, really supporting school and district leaders with a framework that's evidence-based for change. There's also so many things out there that people want to hop on a bandwagon, go all in, and then we turn around, we look, and we say did that really make a difference? Like the millions of dollars that we invested, or hundreds of dollars or thousands that we invested, did it really make a difference? Or are we just hopping on the latest bandwagon? And so really helping folks from an evidence-based change navigate that. Part of the foundation of what we do is known as the Future Ready framework. And it's looking at the big bucket areas from a research end for sustainable change. To walk you through it, I could spend hours on just this, just to do it really quickly. It shows some of the big bucket areas that you were asking about from a Future Ready end that we really focus on. The outside is collaborative leadership and inclusive culture. And if you picture a framework, a pie chart, it's the whole outside. It's what holds it all together. You know, getting to be in so many school districts, I also on the side get to speak a lot. I'm an author, so I get to be in a lot of places. And with that, I've never been in a place that's doing amazing things for kids and doesn't have high octane, incredible leadership, right? I've never been in a place that is doing this awesome work and transformational and has this really toxic, awful culture, right? So we look at leadership and culture being the foundation of it all. And so a lot of the work we do is building leadership capacity, because leadership is not meant to be, as my buddy Jimmy Casas says, this committee of one. Leadership needs to be expanded upon. We need to build capacity. And one of the questions that I get to work with a lot of superintendents around the country that I love to ask is, like, if you left your work today, if you retired today, what would continue in your absence, right? So is this an initiative that's all about one person and they leave, the next day it stops? Well, we either haven't built capacity, or it was really more about ego and pride than it was about doing the right things for kids, right? And so on the outside of the framework, we do a lot of work around leadership, creating cultures of innovation or cultures of empathy, cultures where people want to be, right? So a lot of that's mindset work. You mentioned psychology, and to no surprise in our connection here, I was actually a dual psychology major. And so I do a lot of work really around mindset, right? That whole notion of whether we believe we can or we believe we can't. You're right? Going back to that old adage, and the importance of choosing our lens each day in the work that we do. To hit the gears, we call them, of the framework, just some buckets of work that we do: curriculum, instruction, and assessments, the heart and soul, the teaching and learning side. We're not there to tell folks, here's the curriculums you should purchase. That's not our role. We're here to make sure that we're creating engaging and meaningful and relevant opportunities for kids, right? If our kids continue to ask, why are we learning this? Why are we learning this? That's a sign of one or two things. Number one, in my opinion, they're not connecting the learning to the overall why, the purpose, the connections to the world, and our brain questions, like, what's the point of this, right? Or number two, maybe it's a great question, right? Maybe we need to be really looking at some of the practices and things we have been learning to make sure that it's helping preparing kids for a new world infused with AI and just all the changes in workforce and all that stuff. And we do a lot there too. Another piece is personalized professional learning. We don't call it professional development. We're not mad if you're listening. We're not mad at you if you do. But look at any research on the phrase professional development, and you know what people think about? Sit and get one size fits all, hours-based approach. You know, it doesn't work. That, right? And learning is the heart and soul of what we do. So how, as leaders, do we model the type of experiences we're looking for from our teachers in the classroom? And so we do a lot around professional learning. Another one's around community partnerships. How do we engage our communities, our places of worship, our businesses, places like that? Another one is around data and privacy. I had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress a number of years ago. It's not a red or a blue issue. Both sides of the aisle care about this. How do we make sure that the information that we have is being stored in a way and it's being collected in a way that is very private, and that we are being very secure? All cybersecurity and all those pieces come with that as well. Really comes down to trust in our districts. We messed this up one time. We shattered trust in our community. Real quick, the others do some work around robust infrastructure. We have a tech leader strand, the use of space and time, looking at learning spaces and how our kids are learning there as well. And then budget and resources. And that's really looking at the sustainability. You know, we've had ESSER funds starting to be gone at this point, and how our districts, as we're moving forward, making sure things are sustainable. We have a variety of things in flux. And so the framework is really the foundation for future ready schools. We'll do a lot of in-person events, virtual events, workshops, and things that are free. I encourage folks to check out futureready.org, but lots of things that we can do and lots of supports that we have to really have a consistent vision to help the school districts build their vision, unique for their community, but making sure that it's relevant for today's modern learners.
Wow. So I think it's very nice that you have the in-kind or those affordable or those free workshops for people to look at on your website. However, I also want to go back to your point about districts who often see a new initiative that seems to be moving, have a lot of momentum, It seems exciting, and then the initiative is gone, and there isn't much to show for, right? So, how do you assess if a district is really ready for your model?
Sure. So great question. Number one, can point you to another free resource for that. We actually have a readiness assessment. If folks go to dashboard.futureready.org, it's the one tool that was recommended by the U.S. Department of Education. That's a non-Department of Ed tool to help assess their readiness. It asks them a variety of questions, really looking at the key areas of the framework that I just shared. And so districts can leverage that, get some feedback, and look at, are we ready for some of these pieces? Because to your point, if, for instance, we buy all, and we saw this during COVID, we buy all these devices, but our infrastructure wasn't ready to handle that. We buy all these devices, but we haven't talked about privacy in a few years. What's going on with that? Or our curriculum's not ready to support it. So there's actually a free tool to help districts support that. There's a free tool that they can use to be able to do that. I think another thing that districts can do, and it's not a new concept at all, but the importance of running a really solid pilot, getting feedback from teachers, getting feedback from students, feedback from families to say, is this something that we really want to invest in? It really comes from my belief that every dollar we spend comes out of somebody's pocket somewhere, right? So we've got to do a good job, and that goes back to trust. And we've got to do a job in making sure that the things that we are buying, that we're doing a really good job to make sure it's things that people actually want and people actually use. Walk around schools, open up closets. How many smart boards do we see on carts? How many things do we see technology oriented that's been invested, that's sitting in a closet somewhere? We've got to be really conscious of that. And so I think making sure we're running some really solid pilots and getting feedback from the people that are going to be using it of, is it worth the investment? Are we doing this well? And then working hand in hand with the company to make sure that we have the professional learning to do it well. Professional learning is that vehicle for change. And part of what's a challenge is your staff changes every year, even if it's only a handful of people. And so we get that turnover each year. How are we making sure the people that are coming in, we can't look at it and say, oh yeah, we trained everybody on that 4 years ago. And then people in the past 4 years that have been hired don't even know it exists, right? It also comes down to going back from a framework. You can see how all these pieces interconnect, the sustainability of things. Sometimes we're paying for resources that people aren't even using. Maybe it's a professional learning issue. Maybe they don't even know that they have it or that it exists, but we need to make sure that we're using every dollar well, because that comes down to trust in our communities.
Another thing related to readiness is staff buy-in. And you spoke to the importance of piloting and, contingency management. But can you talk a little more about how you were able to get stakeholders and staff excited about this work in the early years? Because oftentimes our staff, teachers are very skeptical because it's like, okay, here's a new idea. We're trying to balance these demands over here. How long is it going to last? What kind of conversations? How did you facilitate those conversations? How did you get people motivated and excited about this work?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I'll say is I think educators have a right to be skeptical at times, especially when we're saying, hey, we're going this direction this year. We dump all this money and then, all right, now we're going this direction this year. And then all of a sudden now we have a new superintendent. So we're going this direction over here. And it's why you often hear, well, like, I'm just going to wait this baby out because I'll get a new leader another year and it's going to change to something different anyway. That comes from, there's some truth there in a lot of organizations, not everywhere, but that's part of the reason that we're focused from a Future Ready end on leadership and leadership capacity. To answer your question directly, with one of the quotes that I have from my last book, Personal and Authentic, is without a connection to the why, learning is easily stifled, right? And I rate that from a student point of view, as I was sharing earlier, but I believe the exact same thing is true around professional learning. Hear me out for a moment. I think a great example of this actually happened during COVID, right? We've offered ed tech solutions, ed tech workshops forever. I want you to think about what happened if you're listening to this during COVID, when all of a sudden, pretty much overnight, we had to pack things up in schools and all of a sudden do things virtually. All of a sudden, overnight, folks became completely connected to Zoom, to Teams, to whatever platform you want to use, and they figured it out pretty much overnight, right? Now, here's why I share that. There was a perfect why there. People realize instantly, if I don't learn this, I'm not going to be able to connect with my kids. That's not an option. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to learn this software, learn how to do this online, was it perfect? No, of course not. But the why was there. Without it, I can't connect with my kids. So educators, to their credit, all across the country did whatever they needed to to figure it out to connect with their children. Why? Because the why was so large. Without it, we can't connect with our kids, which shows you that things can transform pretty quickly if people buy into the why. If I see that why, I'll give you a quick example of everyday life of just being vulnerable. I'm open to just my own vulnerability, and then I'll connect it really back to your question. Somebody that travels, I'm on the road all the time. I often eat unhealthy all the time. I put on a few extra pounds quite often that I try to get rid of. And I'll make every excuse in the book as I travel, as I go. I know what I need to do. I know what I should do. I should choose that salad over that cheesesteak at the Philadelphia airport while I'm there, right? I know what I need to do, but I come up with every reason. Well, it's kind of, I don't feel like doing that today. I want to do that. However, if somebody, and I know this sounds like a crazy thought, if somebody in turn said, Tom, your children's life depends on it in the next 3 weeks, I would do whatever it took to make sure it happened. Why? Because my why is so large that it's a non-negotiable. And so to answer your question on both of those examples, when the why is large enough, people will do it. People will want to do it. I think people are tired of the, hey, here's the next solution. Here's the next solution. Here's the next solution. Here's the next solution. Just trying. And then they're running, they're trying, they're running. They get like this initiative exhaustion, right? And I think when that's the case, it's understandable that that in those moments that they're skeptical. I get that. I do. So to me, it brings it back to the why. How does this benefit kids? Let's show from kids. Let's hear from kids. Because when teachers see that it's going to help their kids, they're going to buy in. If they look at it of like, what is this going to do? How does this going to benefit me? That's a good question to ask, because they're always feeling like they've got so much on their plate, which they do. There's so much that they're trying to do, which is absolutely real. So show them why it's going to be an investment in their time, why it's worth their time, effort, why it's worth the finances of the districts. That has to be the starting point. Too often we start with the what. And I'm starting to actually refer to like Sinek's golden circle, right? Here's the what. This is what we're going to buy. This is how it works. And oh yeah, this is why you should use it. And people have been skeptical in the first, hour of the presentation, being like, I already have enough stuff. I don't need more stuff to do. Where if we flip it. So here's a piece of advice. There's amazing power in storytelling. There's amazing power in the connections that happen with the brain, right? There's amazing power in storytelling with children, right? And so if we can capture the why, hearing from kids, if I started with something and the first 10 minutes was hearing from children on how it helped them and why it was beneficial and how it helped them learn and how it helped them engage and how it helped them, and that's how I start, I'm not saying every teacher is going to buy in. I don't think I've ever had a case ever that every person was like, we're all in, we're all in. That's human nature. When you pull that many people together, everybody's got their own different experiences, right? But when we start with storytelling, when we start with the why, when we start with impact on kids, the educators that I know, great educators around the country, when we start with that why with kids, they're going to be more open to it, right? And so not making it about a person, not making about just a piece of research out there, although that's really important. Start with kids. What's the impact on kids? And to me, that's the starting point related to that.
That is great. So tell me about community partnerships and your views on how districts can be more effective in bringing community-based organizations to the table and keeping them there.
Absolutely. And there's so many facets of community, right? And what I love related to this is I get to see a lot. I was just in California last week, and I worked with a whole bunch of pretty rural districts, right? And what a community looks like in a rural district. And I've worked with districts where the admin's like, I am the superintendent. And by the way, I'm also the high school principal. And I drove a bus last week, right? What a community looks like in a rural community. And by the way, there's some of the greatest communities in America. Also, it's gonna be a little bit different than some of the urban districts. I was just in Santa Ana a number of months ago, one of the largest districts in California, heavily urban. And what's the community look like there? So when you look at from a Future Ready and the community partnerships here, I would say it's really anything on the outside of these walls that can benefit kids. So on one hand, let's look at businesses, right? And it can't always just be the like, give to us, give to us, give to us. Like partnership really shows it's a two-way street, right? So I'm thinking about a buddy of mine who just retired, Mike McCormick, is former superintendent now in Valverde in California. One of the things that he did that I love, he brought in, and it's a good sized district. I believe they've got, I want to say almost 30,000, 25,000 kids, somewhere in there, good sized district. He brought in, he brought in about 200 community partners, people that were running businesses, people from the hospital, people from places of worship, brought them all in and said, we've got your next 25,000 employees. What do you need? What are we missing? What does our community not have in terms of skills? What are you finding that you're having to retrain our graduates over and over? And he started there. And what came out of it is some amazing workforce development pathways and true partnerships with the hospital, partnerships with the police force, partnerships with what kids were interested in throughout their community. And guess what? Kids kind of stopped asking if they're learning to be an electrician. They stopped kind of asking a lot of the, why are we learning this? What I said earlier, when they're learning on something about code, because it's really blatantly obvious. If you don't know this, and in the electrician place, the place could burn down and lives could be lost. That's part of the why, right? And so in asking the community partners, what do you need? How can we support? They've created this incredible, they have a printing press now. You see, they used to outsource all that stuff. And anybody that's done anything with signs and jerseys and t-shirts know that that can be really expensive. Well, guess what? It's now all in-house, student design, student run, students work the equipment. And now outside places are actually hiring them internally as a district. They're making over $1 million a year. It's incredibly sustainable. But now kids also have skills that they can go out and they can open up their own t-shirt shop if they want, open up their own printing press, go work for some of that. But it came from, here's a need, here's something we're outsourcing. Let's find a way that our kids can be trained to actually do it even better. But they partnered with places in their community that were doing that. And now as a district, they're saving money, they're making money, and kids have skills. I mean, that's what it's all about, is it not? Another place I heard about, this is one of the greatest examples I've ever heard. And I would love to know the district. I've got a research of the district. It was an article I read about a month ago where a school district in Texas were building a new high school. And what they built in the high school was they built retail space. I'd never heard of that before, but guess why they did it? So that the students could run businesses, the students could work in businesses as part of their high school pathway, entrepreneurship, and all the different things that they were doing. And guess what it did? Now we also have businesses that are renting from the district, and the cost came down because places are now paying rent related to it, and kids are getting skills all on their high school campus. Now they don't have to even drive across town. There's a whole bunch, and I don't know the exact number of districts, the high school in Texas, I'm sure people can Google it. I wish I knew the top off the top of my head, but that's a case where they're looking at it differently. They're partnering differently. And in doing those pieces, it's what an experience for kids, right? And so I think asking our community, because it's our community, it's our children, going to them and starting by saying, what do we need? What are we missing? When our kids graduate, what are we missing in our community? And the amount of businesses that turned and said, hey, if you're going to start up a class like this, we'll help you get started with some machinery. We'll help you get started with some pieces over here. And all of a sudden they had some really great partnerships. And now a lot of those businesses are also looking to hire graduates. And what family doesn't like that? And by the way, either side of the aisle is saying that's a great thing for kids. And so with that, it gets me fired up and excited, if you can't tell.
Well, I mean, it is an amazing concept, and especially the entrepreneurial piece, because there are some children who don't necessarily want to go the traditional work route. And so it lends that flexibility for children, no matter who they are, no matter their intelligence type, to see themselves in the curriculum. And then also to benefit financially, specifically for children who come from environments where they have a significant financial need. To be able to go to school, to work there, and be compensated there is also an amazing concept, which also I believe strengthens our economy, because young people, unfortunately, most of them spend the money and consume just as soon as they earn it. So I think there's that piece as well.
Yeah, Tracee, another example of that. I've got to give Cajon Valley School District in California another shout out. In both Valverde and Cajon Valley, very high levels of need. This isn't your suburban, primarily white district. This is a very diverse, lots of dozens of languages spoken, very, very high need. And then speaking about that, Cajon Valley does one of the best jobs related to workforce that I've ever seen. Starting in kindergarten, they use the RIASEC framework. And the RIASEC framework is a kind of a self-discovery framework where kids learn who they are as an individual. And the reason I thought to share that was to your point of, are kids able, whether it's financial needs or whatever it might be in the home, how do we help kids be able to visualize and see what's possible in life if they don't understand it or get to see it from home, right? I recognize that in my own privilege, in my own world, the conversation for me growing up was always when you go to college. But I recognize for so many kids that I served, that was a blinder I had to remove and say college was be a first time thing for a lot of the kids that I taught. How did I get them to see that you can belong there? You can go there. That's a opportunity for you if you want. But that also relates to when I think about Cajon Valley, having kids as early as kindergarten just study when we natural connections. What are the jobs out there that people, you can be an app designer. What does an app designer do? You know how when we use our iPad, if kids don't realize that's a job, they can't shoot for it, right? So how can we turn kids on and get them excited about all the different things that they want to do in life related to who they are as a learner? This isn't about we need X number of electricians, so all of you have to go in this. That's not about that at all. It's what do you love to do? What are you passionate about? Who are you as a learner, as an individual? And by the way, if that's who you are, here's also 75 different careers that we should explore. And I'm not just talking about senior year before I go to post-secondary. They're starting in a district like Cajon Valley in kindergarten, just so kids get excited about and learn about all these professions. How do they help us? What do they do? You're into service. You like helping other people. Look at all these different professions. So by the time that they graduate, some of them are saying, you know what? I want to go into the military. It's exactly what I do. I want to start my own business. That's exactly what I do. I want to go to a 4-year college and I want to major in this. But they have a better opportunity as opposed to they graduate, they're really quote unquote well-rounded and they have no idea what they want to do in life. And then they happen to take out $200,000 in debt. And now they're leaving being like, what do I want to do in life? And then we wonder where these problems come in, right? And so to help people discover who they are, not telling them who they are, discover who they are, discover what they love, discover what does that look like throughout work. And then kids being able to say, you know what, identifying, I'd much rather, like I shared how earlier I wanted to be that pediatrician. I'm really glad that I figured out that I wanted to work with kids in the way that I do, like before paying for med school, than going through it all and doing it, right? Taking it out and being like, it's not what I really want to do. And how many of this latest generation are kind of stuck in that? How do we help them explore and figure out who they are as a learner and their passions, their interests, and their strengths, like I write about in Personal and Authentic, my last book, to be able to explore those things so that when they go off, they have a much better idea and understanding of what's possible, even if they're not seeing it at home.
Wow. Well, speaking of younger learners and community partnerships, can you speak to your work related to social service engagement? Because oftentimes students come to school with needs, and schools are not necessarily equipped to handle all of those additional needs. So tell me about your work in that realm and your thoughts.
Yeah, it's such a deep question because you want to talk about areas that schools are tremendously under-resourced. And I will say, just in my own experience, as I look around, when we look at our social workers, when we look at our school psychologists, when we look at community partnerships related to a lot of that, many times it's your suburban wealthier districts that have far more folks on staff and your urban or less affluent districts that have far less in staff because of budgetary constraints. And I don't want to say the need's always higher in one than the other, but a lot of times those needs aren't able to be met there. And so on our end, I think part of what we do at Future Ready, and we also have a focus really on SEL, the social emotional learning side, as well as mental health. And that's for students and for staff there as well. And so I think it's helping folks focus on not just the academic, the math, the reading and the writing, but the social emotional side as well, right? At the end of the day, if a student graduates with some perfect GPA and all these full scholarships, but isn't doing okay here and here, like, are we proud of that? Are we not? Do we miss something? Right. And so I think it's educating on that whole child piece, not just the academics, and making sure that that stays in proper priority. You see, part of the reason I look at things the way that I do is because I have my own children, my own daughter and my own son. And when they come home from school each day and I look at them and have a conversation, of course I care about how they're doing with reading and math. Of course they do. But ask any parent in the country if they care about their child's well-being and mental health. And to me, that's at the top priority for, if not all, most parents, right? Not to say the other stuff isn't important, but we need to prioritize it first and foremost in our schools. I say that also then recognizing the professionals from the outside that are experts in those areas can be also few and far between. Was working with a district, and I'm not going to mention the state, not trying to throw the district under the bus at all, but they have been advertising a position they shared recently for 2 years to get another school psychologist in, and they're just struggling trying to find somebody that can support them. They were also struggling with a specialist for speech and language just to get an applicant in, and they've been struggling with getting any applicants in, and that's supporting students' needs. And so I think the community partnerships here are huge. I think partnering with our hospitals and our places that do support mental health are absolutely massive. And I think as school and district leaders, we need to make sure that's a priority And it's a way I think that we can really support community partnerships. In the district that I live in, Pennsylvania, they do an incredible job of having parent nights, helping them teach about things around mental health and student safety with cell phones and things that can really interconnect to the work that we're talking about. Because I really believe personally there is a mental health crisis in our country, and it's not just student related. And so I think that the next conversation, the flip conversation, becomes the how do we also support that for teachers as well? Because we can't pretend that teachers walk in a given day, drop all their baggage and stuff at the door, and then are just this perfect person walking in with nothing on their hearts, nothing on their minds. Like they've lived through trauma and struggles as well. And so as school and district leaders, how do we recognize that? And I think the other piece to all of those things, when we talk about the SEL side, in my book, Personal and Authentic, I talk about it, the hidden stories within. And with that, how do we also make sure that going back to the mindset piece, the culture piece, that when we know that there's issues there, we know that there's struggles there, that we're not also simultaneously lowering the bar and lowering our expectations. Because if we're doing that at the same time, we're now part of the problem and a big part of the problem. And so I think it's high expectations, but some more love, some more empathy, some more resources where needed as well. I could go on and on about that. That's a passion area for me. And I think from a Future Ready end, it's supporting mental health, supporting wellness, supporting the fiscal sustainability, and making sure we're prioritizing those folks that are there in those fields there as well. And at the end of the day, going back to why, because our kids, it goes beyond the reading, the writing, and the math. And unfortunately, our schools are forced to deal with so many society issues and mental health and poverty and some of the impacts of all those different pieces then fall on our doorsteps. And we've got to deal with them. But when we talk about loving and caring about kids, that's certainly something that comes front and center.
Absolutely. Let's transition into your work at the federal level. You testified before Congress and collaborated with a number of governmental bodies. Tell me, what has been your proudest accomplishment in doing that work, and what was your biggest lesson?
Ooh, that's a good question there. So I want to give a shout out to our policy team at All for Ed there as well. We have a whole slew of folks that work on federal level policy, state level policy. They're brilliant. They're incredible. And that's a whole other access to the work there. And I want to give them a shout. They're doing the policy work pretty much on a daily basis. When it comes to the federal side, you referenced testifying in front of Congress and all those pieces. I would come down to say, our work at Future Ready, we with the U.S. Department of Education back in 2014, launched Future Ready Schools. President Obama helped launch that at the White House with us, and it was really focused around access and opportunity. And so I believe that part of I'm always hesitant to say here's my accomplishment, because there's nothing in life that I've done that's been solely by myself and had people get there. So I would say from our end, the ability to raise awareness on things like home connectivity and who are the students that don't have the connectivity, that's been a huge piece to really pushing that. Our ability to build this network of thousands of school districts to support transformation, to support innovation, but yet keep the level of need of students front and center. As an equity-focused organization, raising awareness around connectivity, raising awareness around poverty, raising awareness about making sure that some of the assumptions that we've often have that have left those kids behind, or some of those structures that have really marginalized some of those groups, really can be broken down and need to be broken down to support them. And so I'm proud of our team for the work that we do, the partnerships that we've built, the awareness that we've built, the resources that we've built to support teams, to support school and district leaders so that they can then do the work that needs to be done. I guess I'd say one of our proudest accomplishments, going back to again, is raising the awareness of, and having our names not as individuals, but as an organization put out by the FCC, put out by folks that when they're getting additional funding, millions and millions of dollars in additional funding that we helped advocate for to support students that need it most. And so don't list that as a Tom Murray accomplishment, because it's not. But I'd say Future Ready and All for Ed is really proud to work for my home organization because of some of those pieces there as well.
Well, working with the federal government, what has been one of your biggest lessons?
Oh, that's right. You asked me that, and I apologize. I skipped that piece. One of my biggest lessons, and I will say from a personal end here, and having been able to work with both sides of the aisle, there's everything that we see in the news is so politicized, especially now with an election season. it seems that everybody hates everybody. Everybody's always pointing the finger. You're either on one side or the other. The other side's evil. We could put all that stuff together. Having worked with both sides of the aisle, I'll say one of my biggest lessons is there's great people on both sides of the aisle. They believe what they believe because of their own lens, because of their upbringing. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. I would say the media often glorifies like the headbutting, but there's so much that happens in DC. There's so much that happens from a political level where things go through that are passed really well across the board. The majority of things get passed, across the board in votes. You never hear about them. And I would say there's great people on both sides of the aisle doing really good work in what they believe. Is the nonsense there? Absolutely. I've seen it front and center. But don't just watch the news and judge everybody across the board and how that is. There's some folks that really, truly do care, that are there for the right reasons, that are trying to do the right work, that go to work every day. And we expect them to be experts in all things, in all areas, all the time. They really can't be. Part of it's why they have some staff, right? But at the same time, they're trying to do some great work. So on one hand, before you point the finger, give folks some grace, if you would, because they're trying to do some of the great work. And remember that as we talk about some of these folks, they do have families, they do have children that they love and care about, just like we all do about our own. And I would say before we kind of throw the stone or do that, looking in the mirror and saying, well, what can I do to help? If I disagree with this, what can I do to help? If this is an issue that I care deeply about, what can I do to help? As opposed to making sure those are the only folks that are doing it, because each of our voices really does matter. And I would say your advocacy really does matter. So no matter what side of the aisle you fall on listening to this, picking up the phone, calling one of your local representatives, writing your local representatives, be an advocate, because I will tell you, they really do. The vast majority of them, their offices really do care, especially if you're in their voting zones, they really do care. And so be an advocate for the things that you care about, that you're personally passionate about, no matter what that may be. And before we throw that finger or whatever, throw that stone, or that finger, I guess, right? Before we throw that, let's make sure that we're looking in the mirror first to say, what can I do differently to support that, to make that better, as opposed to just the arguing and all the nonsense we see on social media and across the board.
So speaking of solutions and engagement, there is overwhelming, I think, research showing that women are underrepresented in positions of leadership within the education system. Can you give us some thoughts to why that might be and some potential solutions?
Yeah. So interesting asking that as a white male. I need to recognize my own looking in the mirror. Are there opportunities that I've had along the way because of who I am or because of other areas there? And I'll tell you, it's interesting as well, because out of all of the bosses I've ever had, and when I was a teacher, all my principals, or even in the organization I currently work, I've worked for far more women than I have for men, which is a really interesting. I don't know if that's by chance, because I know the statistics that you're referring to, some of the glass ceiling pieces, even related disparities in pay. So I would say first and foremost is I'd love to hear from females and some of the struggles that they've had that maybe that I haven't had. Let me kind of change the question if I could. What can somebody like me do to support women in leadership, is kind of the way that I would frame it for myself, because I can't speak to having been a female and not had people look at me at the table like they might look at a good old boys club, because I've got a lot of female friends and colleagues that are high level leaders across the country, and just hearing their stories is an important piece. So I would say, as a male leader, listen to your female colleagues and listen to their stories. Ask them about some of their struggles. Ask them about things that maybe your lens is missing. And I shared earlier, very vulnerable. There's been so many times in my life when I was like, I can't believe I've been completely blind to that. And maybe it took something, or it took a situation, or it took a health issue, whatever it was, to change my lens. And so I guess as a male, the first thing I would say is making sure that we're listening, not listening to respond, but listening to understand, that we're listening to our female colleagues, that we're asking questions, that we're giving them a platform to make sure that their voices are represented. And as we look around the table, if there isn't a diversity in lens, a diversity in gender, diversity in race, we've got to be very conscious of that and recognize, well, then where are our blinders, right? And so the other piece that I would say is really being conscious of amplifying the voices of others. I did another podcast, a good friend, Sarah Johnson, and she gives shout outs to folks that amplify the voices of females. And so she does a great podcast on that. And she asked me to be a guest, which I was super honored on, because typically it's all female guests. And she asked me that exact question, because the premise of it was, Tom, you seem to do this well. How do you do it? So the other pieces that I would say, as an author, it's really important that it's not just my lens when I write a book. In the last few books that I've written, Personal Authentic, my last book, there's over 100 voices that were amplified. And I would say to me, it also goes beyond gender, which I think is really important, but to race and to other places as well. And it was an opportunity for me to amplify the voices of people that didn't look like me and people that saw the world different than I do. Not that one's better than the other. They're different, and they're fundamentally different, and recognizing that. And so I think another piece, another strategy isn't just to listen, but it's to make sure we're amplifying their voices, amplifying opportunities. The third piece that I would say is when it comes to leadership and even recruitment, I've seen a lot of districts when we think about leaders, and they'll put it out kind of in their normal nets, like, hey, here's a principal opening, a superintendent opening. They put it out in their normal nets of like, we post it here, we put it on Facebook, we put it on LinkedIn. If you always do what you've always got done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten, right? Going back to that adage, there's a point where, and again, this is different level, maybe you're a school board member. How do we make sure that we're also actively recruiting diverse voices, diverse perspectives, not just saying, oh, I posted it and sorry, only 8 white males applied. They only applied, as opposed to, no, we need to actively recruit. What universities, what doctoral fellowships are we partnering with to saying, hey, we want diverse applicants to make sure that we get the best of the best, and a set of diverse lenses here that comes here. And so I think it's listening to understand, number one, amplifying voices, number two, and when it comes to actual positions of leadership, making sure that we're actively recruiting beyond some of our more normal ways of doing that. And so from my male perspective, that's what I would say to my male colleagues on something that I would say sometimes we need to switch our lens on that, and making sure that we are doing that, because the disparities when we look at pay, the disparities in position are very real, and every metric that we see out there. So I looking again in the mirror, what can I do in those roles to support that?
Well, we appreciate your comments here and your support, because as a female leader, we need allies. We
Yes.
need people to speak out. And that actually leads to my next question. You've been named one of the top 100 influencers in education. So with the responsibility of that and the prestigious pride and being a winner of multiple awards, how can you use that platform to leverage and continue to drive positive impact?
Yeah. So a couple pieces, and kind of building on things that I've said. Number one, any of those awards or those recognitions, they're all nice, but I will say it's never been solely about me. There's been other people that have supported me, opened up, amplified my voice along the way. And so I recognize all those pieces are well and good, and I certainly appreciate it, but recognize everything that I've done is truly a team effort, and that's really important. Number two, to your point, I really think it's building on what I was saying earlier of, I really believe when you have a platform, you have the moral and ethical obligation to amplify the voices of others. So let me give you a couple ways that I do that. One of the things that I love to capture are leadership minutes, and I share them out a couple times a week from just diverse perspectives. And so on social media, you will often see, if folks follow me on social media, I'll be bringing other voices standing side by side and say, Rosa, one of the things that I love that you talk about is digital equity. And tell us a little bit about why you're passionate about it and some of the work that's happening there. For a minute, they'll just give a quick synopsis. Here's kind of what we're doing. And by the way, check out this resource. And then being able to use my platform to leverage other voices are important. So if you read any of the books that I've written, if you check things out in those leadership minutes and so on and so forth, you will see a lot of voices that are different than mine, from experience, from race, from gender, and so on and so forth, are amplified. And so I really believe when your platform grows, and it's something I'll say that I've had to learn over the years, not something going back to 25 years ago that I thought at all about then, recognizing my voice is one voice. It doesn't always mean it's right. It's my perspective and how I've lived things, how I've grown up through things. How do I make sure that if I'm sharing things with an audience, it includes diverse perspectives from different upbringings, different experiences, because that's what's better for that's what's better for those that are listening, those that are engaging, and for your audience. And so really comes back to, we need to make sure that we have diverse perspectives. We have diverse circles in which we're learning from. If you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to pick up the phone right now, scroll through your last calls that you've made for the last week. What do all those people have in common? What are the differences that you see? Are we ourselves learning from diverse perspectives, just people that are different in different ways from us, so that we can learn and grow and become better, so that we can see where our blinders are, like I mentioned early on, to pull some of those down so that we can ultimately do the work that we all need to do better by meeting people where they are.
That is amazing. And that's going to lead to my final question. You spoke about diverse voices, and also acknowledging our privilege and engaging people who don't necessarily share our privileges. And so that brings me to parents.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to parents, and how can they become involved in systems level education work?
Yeah, they're often the forgotten group, are they not? It's often, here's what we're going to do to you, or here's what we're going to inform you with, or we have to stop you at the door every day. And I get the whole school safety piece today. It's such a vital aspect. And for parents, number one, the thing that I'll recognize is you will always be your child's largest advocate. Let me say it again. You will always be your child's largest advocate. It does not mean that the people inside don't care about it at all. That's not what that means, but you will be your child's largest advocate. You also know what really works for your child. And so my encouragement to parents would be, number one, is keep it real, right? As educators, when we're working with parents and recognizing, just keep it real in the sense of, we know your kid's going to be a great kid. We get that, but every child has struggles in different ways. And don't be afraid to talk about some of those struggles so that they can support them in different ways, but also advocate for your child. And don't be afraid to do that. If you feel, for instance, that your child's not getting the support that they deserve, if you feel your child needs some additional testing because things just don't seem right and it seems like it's a huge struggle, be the first voice to say, hey, my child needs help, and continue to be that voice until you see the help that the child needs and deserves. I'd certainly start with the teacher. Sometimes in working with parents, sometimes they say, well, I'm going to email the superintendent. And it's, all right, let's back that down a little bit. Let's start with the teacher, because maybe, at what time they go to specials might not be the superintendent, like the example there. Start with the teacher and advocate there and build that relationship with the teacher. And I would say that relationship that the teacher should be building with you, try and build with them as well. And certainly if you need to get a principal involved or somebody else, I encourage you to do so if needed. But I would say start at the level where the issue is happening and really try to come to that conclusion. If you have supports and advice, just like the question that I was asked, if you have ideas or supports advice, bring that as well. Because when we talk about the team, you are a vital part of that team. And besides the student, the most important part of that team. So bring your ideas, bring your thoughts and connections to be able to benefit your kid, and recognize, going back to what I said, you are going to be the largest advocate for a child. So don't ever stop advocating for what it is your child needs and deserves, so that we make sure that we are meeting their needs as we're legally obligated to do so.
Thank you so much for coming and spending your time with us today. Thank you for offering a grounded approach to such impactful work. Unfortunately, sometimes in education systems and in any system, the conversation is more about power than productivity and impact.
So well said.
Thank you for using your power to scale up and increase productivity and impact for our children, who are our future and who need it so much. Thank you again for your time.
So well said, Tracee. Thanks for the opportunity, and I appreciate you having me on.
When you show us what we can be, and give us the tools to succeed. They will strive, they will thrive, they will rise.